I'm Matt Housley, and you're listening to It's About Data, Episode 4. This time, Tony Baer and I are joined by Sanjeev Mohan to discuss Oracle's recent moves in the cloud space. All right, Sanjeev, welcome. This is fantastic to have you here. Extremely well-respected analyst in the data industry, and our topic for today is not really recent news, but more, I would call it comparison, kind of cross cloud comparison. We're going to be talking about Oracle a bit and their hybrid/multi-cloud strategy.
Thank you so much. And this timing couldn't be any better because we just came back from Google Cloud Next. Tony and I were there just last week.
And it was right after, of course, Oracle had its database, analyst summit, barely a couple weeks earlier.
That's correct. So a lot of moving parts. Actually, it's super exciting, to be honest, because what used to be these separate camps, and you had to pick one or the other, and you just couldn't talk about them in the same sentence at the same place. Now you can. Now you've got Oracle with Microsoft Azure. Then they announced with AWS. At reInvent last year. Now they are also in Google Cloud data centers. So I think this is good for the customers, and it's definitely good for us to be able to talk about these together.
Yeah, let's dive in on that a little bit more, Sanjeev. So, kind of what's your takeaway in terms of how Oracle is approaching this versus some of the others with regard to multi-cloud?
So maybe we can give your listeners a little bit of an inside story of how this interconnect came about. This was an idea of Oracle and Oracle alone. They decided with Microsoft Azure, basically the conclusion they reached was that Microsoft Azure had much better tooling for BI through Power BI, obviously, and even machine learning and AI. Oracle's expertise was in the database. So Oracle started co-locating their database within milliseconds of latency from Azure. And then Microsoft initially was like, "Whoa, who are you?" And like I need my space. But then Microsoft warmed up because they saw that this is what customers wanted. They didn't necessarily want to move their Oracle Exadata into SQL Server, for example. So they then actually got so enamored by this concept that they actually started selling it. So what was actually an Oracle skunk work became a joint Microsoft and Oracle partnership. And then soon enough, both Google and AWS also saw that there's huge benefits of using the best of both worlds, and that's how it all came together.
Yeah, let's take that. We'll take that a few steps back there because it was a really interesting learning experience for both Oracle and Microsoft, and it's interesting to look at how that relationship evolved. It was truly a learning experience, which is that initially started where basically it was kind of like the enemy of thy enemy, type of thing, because basically at the time, Oracle's, Microsoft was a boogeyman for Oracle maybe 20 years ago. That's long in the past. And basically by 2019, it was really Amazon that was in Oracle's sights. And so Larry was constantly at Oracle World, basically doing basically a lot of taking down of Amazon, saying, by the way, autonomous databases, we'll guarantee it for being half the cost of Redshift and so on. It was constantly baiting Amazon, but it was not, Microsoft was not in it, within the sites. And so what it basically started as, it was an interconnect. And the premise was that in many cases, go to Northern Virginia, for instance, which is like you have more data centers per square inch than almost any place on earth, is that in many cases, an Oracle data center and an Azure data center were maybe like across the street from each other. And in some cases, we're inside the same building, the same colo facility. And so it was initially an interconnect, and then they gradually evolved that over the years as they saw how their customers were working together. And it finally I think it was roughly about 3 years ago, where Microsoft, finally took, they both took the final step where they would basically, invite Oracle Exadata, infrastructure literally inside the Azure data center, inside the Azure control plane. But it was essentially, it was foreign infrastructure that's now integrated inside Azure. And that is basically, that's essentially the pattern that Oracle has repeated with the other two. Now, of course, Google also, did support the interconnect, but it's pretty clear that the real trend here is for Oracle to basically plant, its infrastructure inside the data centers of the hyperscalers, and where this really went full circle. And I think with all of us in the analyst community, we had to change our diapers when we saw this. But it was at reInvent, it was at reInvent where Larry Ellison went up on stage with Matt Garman. Now, Sanjeev, correct me if I'm wrong. Was that reInvent or was that at Oracle World? Is that one of those two?
Actually, it's a good point. I think it was at Oracle Cloud World.
Okay.
That Matt Garman.
I stand corrected.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was really, given the huge rivalry between the two, to see the two CEOs on stage, and that this was definitely, obviously Oracle has been looking for this for a long time, and obviously, Amazon was not going to be, was not going to play easy to get, but ultimately, this was clearly a case of where the customers basically told both CEOs, sit down together. We want you to work together if you want our business.
You know what, Tony, shocked me was a couple of years ago when the Microsoft Interconnect was announced.
Yes.
Larry Ellison, he's been running Oracle for almost like 50 years now. He had never in his life been to Redmond, to Microsoft campus.
That's amazing.
That was the first time ever he was in Redmond with Satya Nadella announcing this partnership.
Yeah. I think it also points to another fact about Larry, which is that he will stick to something until he is proven wrong, and then he is certainly willing to basically make a 180. And I have to give him a huge amount of credit for that.
Right. So now with this Google-Oracle partnership, I think, what is it called? Oracle Cloud at database at Google Cloud.
Well, actually, they expanded this. And it's kind of funny because I remember I was at Oracle World last year, and I asked Juan, I said, does this apply to Oracle-based database? And I was almost laughed out of the room. Well, with Google, one of the announcements is Oracle-based database service at Google. So I was so wrong that I was that basically I predicted the future.
You're so wrong that you were right, basically. Okay. Yeah, so here's my question. Does this portend a broader trend? Is anyone else beyond Oracle going to be able to pull the same move? Are we going to see Azure? You think it's possible? Okay.
No, I think Oracle was an outlier in this case. It wasn't a hyperscaler. And so it could do it. The only other company would be IBM Cloud or IBM DB2. That in my mind. But I think IBM is playing a different game with Red Hat. Yeah. They're more into the hybrid, OpenStack, Red Hat. So they're not really into this same space.
And IBM is very much pushing their relationship with AWS. That's really been the key. IBM's strategy is that this is all based around Red Hat OpenShift. And that's been, and we'll be talking about that, after IBM Think. But I've been fully convinced that essentially that the Red Hat acquisition for IBM was truly transformational. It was really a reverse acquisition, even though, of course, Arvind ended up becoming CEO. But still, it really changed IBM. In that I remember it was back in 2018, and Arvind at that time was still head of IBM Cloud, still during the Ginny era, where he announced that IBM was committed to a hybrid and multi-cloud strategy. And that was essentially a tacit admission from IBM that they had entered this late and they were not going to become a major hyperscaler. Very different for Oracle, by the way. But anyway, at that time, it was really more of a vision that was more services driven. But with Red Hat, it became essentially very software driven. They now had a platform that they could now execute that strategy. And that's been the secret to it. And the fact is that before this, going into this, of course, with Amazon, with AWS, is that they're more than happy to have co-opetition. In other words, the EC2 side ultimately, essentially, drives the decisions there. And that, that obviously there was a very large IBM legacy customer base that Amazon saw as a large target for modernization. And Red Hat was already a very close IBM, I should say, AWS partner. And so, with Red Hat there, it really greased the skids. And so it led to what's essentially a very tight relationship between IBM and AWS, where in many cases, there are IBM services that are available only on AWS and not on IBM Cloud.
Yeah, so because there's a fundamental difference between IBM and all these other four players we talked about. AWS, Microsoft, Google Cloud, Oracle, it's all about driving compute. That's how they make money.
Yes.
IBM doesn't care. They
Yeah.
want to be in the services, they want to build agents, and they want to solve business problems. So they're playing a very different game.
Right, very much so. I want to finish off here by talking just in terms of just the whole expansion. Now, Sanjeev, you and I were basically privy to seeing some of Oracle's plans, which are not at liberty to disclose.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting here are the numbers. And of course, numbers do lie and they don't lie. But I just, you'll have to excuse me. I'm going to read from my notes here that Oracle is going through, I mean, and this is very different from IBM's, strategy. IBM is really more software driven. That Oracle really is trying to expand out the footprint of OCI.
Yes.
But on the other hand, even though Oracle does say that through OCI they will offer a full array of SaaS and platform as services and IaaS, Oracle is real. I mean, from the market standpoint, they're basically a database and application and enterprise applications cloud. So it's a much more compact footprint. Also, Oracle's the OCI Gen 2 infrastructure is much flatter. Tends to be more compact. It's kind of the equivalent, I would say, of like an Amazon local zone or something like that, or a wavelength,
Yeah.
and which makes it a lot easier to transplant in. But if you take a look at the numbers right now, Oracle is actually very leveraged from a capital standpoint, and the debt equity ratio is much higher than that of the hyperscalers. But that being said, also IBM's is as well. That says something, speaks more to the fact that the hyperscalers have much larger market caps than just about everybody on earth out there. But the interesting part about this is that, with one exception, that Oracle's commitment to expansion, even though it's basically, as I said, its debt to equity is much higher, it's backed by what they call RPO, which is remaining performance obligation, which is a fancy way of talking about backlog, which is now $130 billion. That's contracted revenue for products and services yet to be delivered, yet to be recorded on the balance sheet. And that's up from $80 billion last year. That's a 63% chance year over year, or 62% increase, I should say, year over year. As I said, the one variable in all this is Stargate, but Stargate itself is still very vague. But Sanjeev, what's your take on all this?
Oracle has embarked on a very unique strategy. All the other hyperscalers we talked about are into building these very large data centers. Oracle
Yes.
is saying, no, we will build a region wherever you want it. Small. So, like you said, your comparison to AWS local zone and wavelength is basically it could be within an organization. So, as a result, Oracle now claims to have more regions than all these other providers put together. And but the nuance is in how they're defining these regions, because when
Yep.
AWS builds a region, it has minimum of 3 availability
Right.
zones.
Yes.
So it's a play. I think it's more semantics, but anyway, Oracle is on a warpath to build out regions globally.
You have all this backlog of commitments, and I assume that if you have an Oracle contract, you have the right to relocate. Say you have Exadata on-prem, but you need to upgrade it, you can move your contract to GCP or something as long as you're still running on Exadata or whatever, Exadata
Right.
on Google Cloud, which is fascinating. So basically, we talked about in another episode that a lot of this backlog was probably AI investment, but a lot of it is probably infrastructure investment too, like you're saying,
Oh, heck,
Sanjeev.
yes.
And yet you're building out this platform. Yeah.
And in this case, Matt, so that's a great point you bring up. So you move your Exadata into Google Cloud, but your billing is still going to be through OCI, but you can consume it through the Google credits. So Oracle still gets a revenue. The customer benefits because they draw down on their Google commitments, Google Cloud commitments.
Okay, so if you sign a yearly commit of say $10 million and you also have an Oracle contract, it still passes through that $10 million of commit to Google. That's fascinating.
That's
that part I was not aware of. Okay.
Yeah, that's my.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
At this point, Sanjeev, Matt, is there anything more we really want to say at this point before we continue it when we get together with IBM after a couple weeks?
I think that's about it. I mean, I think maybe on another episode we'll kind of talk about other companies' hybrid and cross-cloud strategies, because generally, as far as I know, they're very different. So I'd love to dig into the comparisons there sometime.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Hey.
Thank you for joining.
For
this
me.
was fantastic.
Good
This
talking.
was a lot of fun.
Likewise. Take care. Bye.
Take care.